it sweet again. You can make it sweet again. Even if you feel like part of you has died, you can make it sweet again. You can taste the honey on your tongue. You can taste the honey on your tongue. Even if you're sure that bitterness has come, you can taste the honey on your tongue. You can learn to love your own dark. You can learn to love your own dark. Even if it feels like an impossible lark, you can learn to love your own dark.
Everybody exhale. Wow. Thank you. I'm really excited to have you here and to share you with people that are watching my stuff, whatever that means. Is like, you already gave us such a gift if we ended right now, but we won't. It's like, so I want to introduce everybody to Elana Bell, who is a dear sister friend and amazing poet, sound practitioner, and creative alchemist, and the author of Mother Country, which is a new book, a new poetry book, not your first, but your newest and latest. And I'm really excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Shane. I am so excited to be here and to be in conversation with you and your community.
And so if people are already like, whatever she is offering, I want it. How can people get this book right away, right now?
Oh, well, you can get this book. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it from my publisher, which is BOA, B-O-A Editions. You can support independent bookstores and order directly from them. If you want a signed copy, you can get one from me, but that's like a whole extra thing I can share with Shane how to do that. Or you can find me on Instagram, Elana-Bell, and I can get you a signed copy if you want that.
Okay, awesome. So you are multi-talented and you're a teacher at the famous Juilliard, and you're just really pretty amazing. And I went to your birthing ceremony of this book, and I'm so glad we're doing this interview after that. I pretty much sobbed the whole time. I got inspired to write a long poem, and I was really touched. And I'm just going to keep it together for this interview, but even saying that, and the way you highlighted and shared your space with others, other mothers, is just so powerful. So I'd love to, where do we begin? When did you call yourself a writer? When did you start officially saying that?
That's a great question. I was really an actor, like in most of my life. Like I went to a community theater in Santa Monica, Santa Monica Playhouse. We had to like clean the toilets, and then we got to be in the shows. It was like child labor basically, but like, you know, I got to perform. And I went to a performing arts high school, and in college I studied theater. But I had written, I think I wrote my first poem that I was really proud of in high school. I might even have it here in a drawer, but I don't want to stop this to go look for it. like, and that was, but I wouldn't have called myself a writer. I was just like, oh, I wrote a poem that I love. I was really a theater person. Actually, I think it's so funny as I'm saying this, I'm like, I probably wouldn't have even called myself an actor. Like, I think as women, it's harder to claim these identities. I'm like, oh yeah, I act in plays, and oh yeah, I write poetry, but to actually claim like I'm a writer
Yeah.
really came much later, I would say. But there was, right after I took a class my last year of college at Sarah Lawrence, a poetry class. I know you're smiling about Sarah Lawrence because that's a whole other, like we could talk about Sarah Lawrence. Um, and it was like an extra class that I got to do because I was in good standing. And believe me, the cost of each class at Sarah Lawrence, like a free extra class, is like worth thousands of dollars. like,
Nice.
so I took the class, and that really, I think, opened something up in me that like this was something I wanted to do more of. I wasn't thinking about career. I wasn't thinking, but it was an art form that was suddenly more important to me. And I joined a community of writers at a place called Bar 13 in Union Square in New York City. I actually went the first time to hear my friend slam, and I was never really into the slam scene, but I just loved being community, and I was so moved by the rawness and the vulnerability and the power of what people were sharing about their lives that I wanted to, like I would leave there every Monday night. I would go home and I would like write until the next. I would read in the open mic, and it was just like this. And so I would say that it was a gradual change of focus where suddenly poetry more and more started to come into the focus. And I still did theater and I still performed, but poetry really started to be in the forefront. And then I had a mentor who really encouraged me to get my master's in poetry, and that was like a whole process. And so at some point that sort of took over, although I still am a performer. I perform my work, and so that's always my theater background, and now I get to teach poetry to actors at Juilliard, so it's still there. It's very much present. So yeah, it's been a journey, but I would say college is where I really started making it more important, in the years that followed.
Beautiful. I love the point you brought up of claiming it.
Mm.
That's my whole jam. It's like everyone's an artist. Like, can you claim it instead of like, yeah, I just, painted. I don't know, like blowing it off.
Yeah.
And so your book is Mother Country, and you touch on subjects like mental health, fertility, some really deep. There was one more. What else? What else is deep?
I mean, motherhood.
Oh, right, motherhood. And those are not easy subjects. And so what was your inspiration
For this book?
for this book? Yeah.
So it's a great question. I'm going to say every question you have, I'm going to be like, that's a great question. You're a genius. So my mother was, my mother has always been a really, like a rock in my life. And our relationship is very special. And when I was growing up, my mother was really the ritualist in my family. She was really the spiritual center of our family. My father was like a musician and super out there and like the life of the party. And my mom was like the grounded center. Also a poet, by the way, although she didn't, necessarily take it as far. But that was, she modeled for me that thing of like, she would go away once a year for a week-long retreat. And she would leave us, with my dad and do that for herself. Anyway, so when I was 21, right when I graduated college, she had a relapse of a very serious premenopausal depression. She had a postpartum depression after my brother was born, so very much hormonally influenced. And when I say depression, I mean it was like, voices in her head, like, like not like suddenly it was like there was this space between the mother that I knew and this other, this aspect of herself, and it was very painful. And then she was treated for that quite aggressively with something called electroconvulsive therapy, which actually I wrote a poem about taking her there. And then she was better for a year, and then she was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then she had a relapse of the depression. And so it was all kind of braided together. So that was many years ago, but I think, and I wrote a book in between but that question of just like, I think that grief, I think the well of grief that opened up in me, of feeling like losing someone who's still living in a way. And yet we still are very close, but was just a lot of grief that I wrestled with. And then in 2010, I encountered, I had a situation in a workplace which was really traumatic and triggered my own sort of nervous breakdown. Like, not to where my mom was necessarily, and not hormonally induced in the same way, but quite intense. And that terrified me because suddenly I saw myself like on the continuum, like, oh, this happened to like I kind of conflated our stories, and was like, oh my God, this is what's going to happen to me. And so a lot of fear and pain, and almost like what the Buddha calls like the second arrow, what they call in Buddhism, like there's the experience, like I had the terrible experience of the anxiety and depression, but the second arrow is like the suffering and the stories that I was making up about what that might mean, and carried that with me for a long time, so that anytime I had a lot of PTSD for many years, where like the smallest thing could trigger that fear of like, this is going to happen again, and I was like kind of living with that. So I think that, my mother's situation, that experience, and then my own journey toward motherhood all are wrapped up in it. But I would say the impetus and the beginning is really, if I trace it back, it's to my mother's illness and diagnosis.
And I also want to say, like, at the launch party, your mom read one of her poems. It was so beautiful.
Yeah.
So that was a special moment that I had. What would you say is a special moment, either in the process of writing it or after having it launched? Like, is there one little snapshot or moment that's like feels really good or that you're proud of?
I mean, I think um, getting to hear my mom read the poem of my birth was very potent for me. And also, really getting to say, I mean, in a way, like this book is dedicated to her. And there was a time where I was like, maybe I can't publish this till after she dies. Like, I had that thought at one point in the writing. But I was able to, I think during the launch, I was really able to say to her, like, and we spoke, obviously I got her permission before to like say, I'm going to read some of these poems. And my mom has always really encouraged me to speak my truth and, bring my voice out. So as painful as it is probably for her to hear some of these poems, I think there's like, it's what you call like clean pain. Like when the pain comes from like the truth, and it's like something that's been in shadow is just like named. Like for 20 something years, there's been this grief that we don't really talk about. I mean, my mom, you know what I mean? It's like hard to, how do you talk about that
Yeah.
when your mom is, and how do I do it in a way that's not going to be more hurtful? And she's just trying to fucking survive, and like do the best she can with like whatever she's struggling with. So I don't want to burden her further with my suffering, but to be able in the launch, it felt like a real, like almost like a healing, like generations back and generations forward of like naming the truth, like having this be an honoring of her, actually, like of how much I love her. I have friends who had to have terrible relationships with their parents and like distance, and they don't have something like this in their situation. I wouldn't trade. There's a poem in the book called The Good Years, and I say I wouldn't trade my grief for yours. Wouldn't trade, I don't remember the rest of it, but the years I had with my mother, and I just name like these rituals that I had with her and the love that I felt and feel. So it's like, my grief is my grief, and it comes because of this tremendous love. So the loss feels so much. But anyway, it felt very healing in the book launch to get to say it to her. Say like, this is my way of honoring you and honoring the depth of our love and what you've been for me in my life.
So powerful. Everybody watching, take a breath. It's, yeah, it's so potent and powerful. And it's the reason I think we both and most people love art is there's a place for transformation that's therapeutic, but not therapy. Not that there's anything wrong with therapy, but it's not as much fun to go into the darkness as
Mm-hmm.
creating something. Yeah,
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So when you introduce me like as a creative alchemist, like that is really what I see creative alchemy being. I mean, I see that first of all, I am with you. I believe that everyone like being like having a creative impulse, an authentic artistic voice, like that belongs to everybody. And we all have that from the time we're little. It gets trained out of us, or aesthetic, biases sort of like take it away from us. But I really see the creative act, like making art from emotion experience, that is an alchemical process. And so I think that it really like transforms your lived experience or your emotional experience into something else that is not only of use to you, and I do believe it's of use to you, but it can be of use to others. It can actually offer something to somebody else. And of course, you can't sit down to write a poem or paint a painting and be like, I hope this is useful and helps people. Like you'll do shitty art if that's like your, but in the process, if it's authentic and if it's true, it can't help but be valuable. And I see it like, alchemists, they made gold, like that's what or diamonds out of coal. I mean, that's like what they're doing. And that's what we can do with our lives, is we can take these moments that are painful or joyful or full of rage, and we can alchemize them into something that is gold. And that metaphor is used all the time in like the sort of self-help, like self-improvement world, it's like find the gold.
Yeah, well, also Rumpelstiltskin,
Right.
like very early on, deep art that was given to me as a child. Who knew?
Strong.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, your relationship, like everything you just shared, is like, it's the stuff I like don't want to deal with, So it's really touching, really moving, and I think really relatable for so much, but for people who are not ready for the words yet. Like it's like, oh, good. We all have different details, but the experiences we can really relate to. And it's the gift. It's why people smack down $150 and go sit in theater and are moved.
Mm.
Why we read books, and it's like, so you said that so clean. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to speak to the mother part of this, which is all the moms who are like, well, I don't have time, so I kind of want to know, it's not mundane. It's like, what's your schedule for all the moms who are like, I don't have time. This is amazing. And everyone in the book, are they a mother?
Wait, everyone in the book?
I mean, everyone in the celebration, the birthing is a mother.
Yes.
So that really touched me. And knowing that you're a mother and you have a whole book.
Yeah. So, I mean, my schedule is, I'm very lucky that I have a situation where I'm not working full time. Like I teach, I have clients, but it's all like different, so I do have space in my life. I wanted to acknowledge that someone who's working a full-time job and as a mom, has a different situation than I do. I've always worked as a teacher and a professor and a teaching artist, and so those, and an artist. So, but I geared my life that way before I was actually a mother. So I was always a teaching artist, and so that was my situation. But in terms of schedule, and I mean, I think it's a matter of like, you have to put it in there. Like if you want to do it, you have to make time the way that you would make time to go to your gynecologist, or like make time to take your kids to their play date, or like, you have to put time. And that's one piece. Another piece is really like, I had to shift my relationship to art making. Prior to having a child, I would go on these month-long residencies where I would like, my food would be, it's like artist residencies where you apply and then you get to go, and like your food is cooked for you, and like, you go on long walks, and it's amazing. I highly recommend them. But once I had a kid, that was not an option for me. I couldn't leave my family for 2 weeks to a month. No way. And so I would like, I had my iPhone, and I would like, as I would have a thought or an inspiration or a line, I just had a little place in my notes section where I would just and the last poem, the lyric, it's like a lyric essay in the book. It's called Afterbirth. It's like a prose poem or a lyric essay. That's all from notes that I wrote in my phone, that whole thing. And then of course I like edited it, I printed out, I edited it, it went through a work, but the initial draft of it was all little notes that I would write in my phone if something would happen. And I was like, I said this I was always someone who wrote my poems longhand, first drafts. Like I never wrote in the computer first. And that is still my preference when I'm working on a lyric poem. But also necessity is the mother of invention. And so it was like, I had to make accommodations. And then I think about mother poets who are my, like, I said to someone, I was like, I'm claiming my place in the lineage of mother artists and mother poets. And when I think about mother poets who I admire, like Lucille Clifton, Sharon Olds, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, not a poet but a prose writer who wrote, Women Who Run with Wolves. She wrote that poem on napkins on her while she was doing laundry. Lucille Clifton wrote poem. And napkins is a big thing. J.K. Rowling also wrote on napkins. Like, don't I might use my iPhone, but like, have some napkins, ladies. Like, the napkins are
I
powerful.
love it.
And so just like it's both. It's like I think it's two pronged, right? So I'm intentional about creating time and space for my art, and I'm also flexible and like ready to, like, when inspiration comes, I'm not going to be like, well, sorry, I'm not sitting down at my desk right now. I'm like, well, I better get this down. So I think it's really both. And also I think I would just say to mothers, like, trusting the non-producing years and time, like trusting the intaking time, trusting the yin time, like going into the dark, trusting if you're a mother, like it's also okay if you're not producing all the time. Like there's really, I look at Louise Gluck, who just won the Nobel Prize for Literature after her first book came out. Her first book of poems had, I think, a 4-year period of not writing. And she's very clear about it. She's like, no, I wasn't writing badly. I was not writing, not a word.
Mm.
I was teaching, I was reading, but I was not writing. And so it's all of those pieces. It's like, making time for the muse to show up, being flexible and being available when she does show up, and then trusting the yin dark downtime and not forcing it. Not like, that's a real like sort of masculine like or capitalist, or model of like you have to be producing all the time and your only value is in your production. That's not true.
Beautiful. So beautiful. In my head, I was like having all these mothers that I know like say, what? And you just like nailed it all, which is just get it down on
Yeah.
wherever. I love that.
And knowing that your stories are important,
Yes.
that your whatever they are, whether it's about changing your son's diaper, or your dreams or any of those things, they matter. And it can really feel, at least when I first became a mom, I was suddenly like, I kind of had an identity crisis because I was used to like teaching workshops all over the world and, having all this like validation for the peace work that I was doing with, in Israel and Palestine. Like I really, these external markers of my like goodness and my value were sort of stripped away from me, which was part of what was so painful. And that forced me to really get in touch with, first of all, honoring, what it is to be, what women's work is, traditional women's work. I know in the modern context, men do some of that work, but the majority of it is what's called women's work, or domestic work, and really honoring that for what it is, which is deep, deep, hard work, much harder than teaching poetry at Juilliard for me. Like I would much rather like go teach at Juilliard than like sit at home and have to be 100% present with my son and like deal with like the boredom of that or the like frustration of that or him like hitting me or like not loving me, like being mad at me, all that shit. It's like that's fucking hard work to stay present with that and not like lose it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring this up. Like the truth that you speak is so, it's like a relief. I imagine mothers reading this and being like, oh, we could think that, we could say that. I didn't know. There's like a permission to feel that you offer that's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
So with that, I asked you to choose a poem to
Oh my
read.
God. There's
And
so many. I'm like, which one do I even want to read?
I know. And I thought, like, will she pick one or just like flip around or be inspired? So I'd love to close us out with that.
Sure.
And we're so lucky to get to hear one read from your voice. It's like, to me, that's, yeah, it's special. It's like you can go see a cover band or you could see the real deal.
I think I'm going to read, since we were just talking, there's a couple I would have read, but I think because we were talking about motherhood and like just the truth of motherhood, which is really about this divine, both the like, it's like the greatest ecstasy in my life has come from my son and the like lowest lows, the hardest, like the worst work, So this poem is called Prayer and it's directed to my son. When you are crying and I don't know why, when I cannot soothe or quiet you, when my nipples are sore and cracked from your merciless mouth, or when you refuse the breast. When I finger the purple stretch marks across my thighs and belly, the loose skin, the blood vessels burst around my eyes and cheeks and asshole, which are because you are. When I stink of puke and milk and shit, when I begin to lose my grown-up words from lack of use, when you push the cup of blended yams I've just prepared on the floor for the third time this week, and it isn't an accident, because you looked right at me before you sent it over the edge of your high chair. When I am on my knees before you, little ruler, begging you to eat, to sleep, to piss in the bowl. Let me remember those many nights on my knees, praying to another God, begging for you to come, for life to take hold inside of me and bloom.
Thank you. Everybody exhale. So amazing. Feel really lucky right now to be in your circle, to be sharing you. Um, yeah, I kind of want to just like, I feel the energy, I just want to end it right there. I'll post all the links for everything and la da da. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Shane. My
Mhm.
honor and pleasure.
Mhm.